Okay, so this is Dr. Lehman, and I'm in my office at the Arkansas State University Mid-South over in West Memphis. But I want to give some previews for the units in the Modern European History course at the University of Memphis because I think that we kind of jump into this and a little background refresher or maybe hitting on some key points to go along with your text is a good idea. So hopefully this will be useful for you. These will be less than 5 minutes long, ideally. So this week, our focus is the old regime and the Enlightenment, and then the next unit for the bit is the French Revolution and Napoleon. This is a focus on the old regime and the Enlightenment. Now, we define European history in a lot of ways that are pretty arbitrary. So, there's no momentous change that occurs in any year that really signals that it's the early modern period in Europe or the modern period in Europe. The French Revolution comes pretty close to making the world modern, but so does the Industrial Revolution. These are numbers that historians have used, dates that we've used to try to, impose some sort of sense on the world, and that's kind of a bit of a challenge sometimes. In general, the transition point that we're looking for with the old regime or when the early modern period starts to turn towards the modern era is with the challenge to a way of life that really arose during the Middle Ages, going back to almost 500 CE. So what does that old world look like? Well, it's pretty complicated by, say, 1789 with the French Revolution. There's all of these offices and bureaucracies and people owning land and different conditions of servitude in Europe and abroad. There's colonies, there's empires. But really what we're getting at is a society in which countries are governed mostly by kings, queens, small councils of really, really rich people, and a few church officials. So I've got my little Pope Innocent action figure here that Dr. Blythe at the University of Memphis pointed out to me maybe about 10, 15 years ago as an example. In the ways that this regime of nobility who are raised and trained to fight mainly during the Middle Ages, administer these countries, along with the clergy and minor church officials, the popes of the Catholic Church, the high officials of the Protestant Reformation. These folks, they run not only the government, but society. Keep in mind that the way that people live, like your day-to-day calendar, your schedule of when you wake up, when you go to bed, is often determined by religious rituals, Catholic or Protestant, although Protestant's much more recent, 1500, 1600. And so the old regime that will be challenged by philosophers in the 16 and 1700s in France and elsewhere isn't just about, the American version of challenging who's in power. In a lot of ways, the American colonies have already done some of the work of upheaval and changing the social order. But it's about, you go to a university that's run by a religious official for authority. Scientific developments, scientific theories and ideas are largely based upon ancient sources filtered through the New Testament, filtered through religious scholars from the Middle Ages. And so, when you see the rise of quote-unquote reason and the Enlightenment, it's about power and authority. But that power and authority is political, it's cultural, and what comes into its place is a combination of kind of this international, multicultural study of science and nationalism. And the idea that being a part of a group of people who lives in a certain place gives you a cohesive identity. And that's an important concept for the first, especially half of this course, really. Keeping in mind that people who lived in France or people who lived in England rarely before 1800, 1700, especially before 1600, rarely saw themselves as being one people. They saw themselves as being Christians or maybe members of a certain village community. Subjects of the King of England was a part of their identity. But they didn't necessarily see any special degree of loyalty. It takes until almost World War I to build the kind of loyalty that says when you join the army or you are drafted into the army, you believe in fighting and perhaps dying for your country to where you won't leave because you're hungry or because you're worried about the harvest back home. That kind of loyalty is built and taught over time. And so when we look at philosophers and politicians that challenge the old regime this week, religious authority, political authority, but also the kind of authority that says, you are a farmer, We are the nobility. We run things. We tell you who gets to go to school and who doesn't. We tell you, what time to wake up in the morning and say your prayers before you're allowed to go to work. We tell you what your week looks like. We tell you what your rituals look like, how you get married, how you die, what happens to your body. I mean, I know it's a little morbid, but things like that are a part of it. This is a challenge that's going to start from the idea that we have a greater sense of ability to understand our world and a responsibility to act on it as individuals. Over time, a lot of those identities, that individualism is going to be molded with a sense of belonging to a place, a city, a town, eventually a country. And we're going to follow that process over the course of the semester. Thanks. See you next time.